Hey guys, it's Matthew here once again with another build and another pretty crazy skill that I've yet to touch in PoE2 that, from what I've seen, has been doing some pretty good things on fairly meta builds, something like Deadeye's, maybe Gemlings, stuff like that. Either way, first time I'm really trying and looking at this skill. It is a mace skill and it is Molten Blast. This seems to be one of the strongest skills out there in the game at the moment. It doesn't have the flashiest start to a build or a skill, but once you start getting it ramped and actually give it some attack speed, it can become pretty freaking disgusting. This is the kind of gameplay that it can end up happening, I think, once you get enough attack speed, because every single time you use this skill, it steps you forward. Once you actually get a fuck ton of attack speed, you're just constantly going to be stepping forward and actually moving through the game while killing everything around you, thus giving kind of a cyclone feel from PoE1, but it's a bit more of a directional cyclone because you're just throwing out balls in a certain direction whenever you're stepping forward. But it is kind of like a move to kill autopilot sort of situation, and the acceleration shrine here really shows how super powerful it can end up being. The more vanilla gameplay for my character anyway is something like this, which is about 3 to 3.5 attacks per second, and it still clears really nicely, and it's actually been, I'd say, one of the more well-rounded, funner builds that I've played so far in PoE2, and I can highly recommend trying some Molten Blast on pretty much anything, because this character here is a Stormweaver. It is my first sorceress, and I decided to make a Stormweaver to try out Molten Blast because I know that a lot of people have been playing it as something like a Deadeye, and I wanted to be a bit more hipster than that, so here we are, a Stormweaver. So by choosing Stormweaver, I'm using 2 shocks, and my shocks are something like 90% and 60%, because Voltaic Mark only applies to one of the shocks for some reason. And then I've also got double chill, so we are slowing things down pretty dramatically. And then I've got exposure for extra lightning damage. I'm getting a lot of lightning damage from the fairly popular mace, Visara, I think it's called, which gives you extra lightning damage for enemies hit based on their power. You can see that, yeah, the breach and kind of game glitches out a bit during the Savannah map. I think that's kind of a popular thing to happen, but it's the first time it's happened to my game. In any case, so I am using the Visara, I think it's called, mace, which gives us a lot of lightning damage. So basically I'm scaling the build with lots of flat lightning and then a bunch of attack speed, non-crit, so I'm using the lucky lightning node, and then, I don't know, I guess some evasion and some just overall percent damage. I do think the skill is fairly versatile. You should be able to do like a lot of different things, as in, you know, pure fire damage, pure lightning to cold. Obviously, Hand of Wisdom in action is a pretty big play for this one. Deadeyes, Gemlings, almost any ascendancy I would think does some pretty good stuff. The tough thing about it is to kind of solve single target, because it has a very distinct position or requirement to maximize your damage for where the balls are going to like kind of explode and do more damage. But I've tried to solve that by getting 100% chance to ricochet. I've got something like 90% chance to ricochet, and that means that anytime a target is going to be somewhat near a wall, the balls are going to bounce back and end up double hitting the boss. So for the most part, my build has not had crazy single target, but it hasn't really lacked it in a way where I've thought I've needed to do something crazier, like, I don't know, a shield wall or a frost wall. Apparently there's some tech, you know, to be able to do something like that. I just don't really see the need for it. From my past tests on other things, I think the frost wall is going to die quickly, and I don't know, probably not be that useful, because positionally you are pretty fucked on this skill. Like, it is tough to position with it because of that step forward. It's one of the things most people complain about on this skill. I hate that you click and always step forward this thing. We've tried to solve that sort of annoyance by just making it a bit of a benefit to us by attacking really fast, and thus we're always stepping forward, which does mean that when we're attacking single target, we're constantly stepping forward very quickly, so repositioning is going to be kind of a mess. Though you can put on a second weapon, even in this setup right now, I've only got one-hander and nothing in my offhand for Dance with Death and all the attack speed. You can put on a second weapon which cuts your attack speed in half, but you throw out twice as many balls, and if you do that, you can then kind of rely a bit more on position and maybe like one-shotting monsters and bosses and stuff. Because I don't think my build does severely good damage at the moment. I think if you did kind of like a crit version of the build with some war picks, maybe even Hand of Wisdom in action, you'd be doing some pretty crazy damage and probably one-tapping bosses with the right sort of positional requirements. So mine instead is built a bit more for clear, for comfortable clear, and then also ricocheting and just like face tanking a boss. So far so good. It's done pretty damn well against everything I've thrown at it, and it has been a very smooth level up to like level 89, I think. I die very rarely. I'm based around like some evasion, as some other characters have done as well. Decent bit of life pool, and then just killing things before they kill you, of course. No freeze, unfortunately, so that sucks, but we are chilling things in a very large manner because I get something like, I don't know, 20% chills, 20-30% chills twice on the enemy. And overall, yeah, it's been a very fun, pleasant experience. Like I said, I think it's one of the more well-rounded characters. It feels pretty similar to Essence Drain for me, where the clear is really nice, and I don't feel particularly weak in any like circumstance thus far. So let me go ahead and show you how I built the character up to this point. So here we are, of course, level 88, about to hit 89, so my mistake. Mace, Weaver, Disparage. So I wasn't too hopeful or feeling too promising about Mace attacks in general, and then of course on a Stormweaver, which is a fairly conventionally known caster type character. But it ended up working out really well, and I'm not at all disparaged about this by this point. As you can see, yeah, once you get enough attack speed, you can do some pretty good stuff with this skill, and it feels really good. The base mace here of Olro Visara has really good attack speed, so it goes up to 30% inherently. If you violent for an extra socket and then put 2 attack speed things in there, you hit 2 attacks per second just by default, which is really good. So the skill itself does have this sort of line. While dual wielding, fire twice as many proj with 30 less attack speed. That's how I leveled for a lot of the character. So I was using, like from level, I don't know, 14 onwards, I was dual wielding, and only at around level 60, I think, or once I put this mace on, was I experimenting with just one-hander attacks. Because as you can see, when you've got 2, you fire out a lot more projectiles, and it's a lot bigger AoE, a lot bigger of a shotgun against single target as well. If you get enough attack speed, you can probably still play this fairly comfortably and have just dual wield and then still feel very crazy on a build like this. But it's a lot easier to get to a crazier level of comfort and attack speed with just a one-hander because of the Dance with Death keystone over here. 25% more skill speed while offhand is empty, and you have the weapon in your main hand. So that's basically what we're doing and why we're doing that, and how we get so much skill speed. Given that dual wield cuts your speed by 30% less attack speed, while this, so you remove that penalty and then gain 25% more. Essentially what's happening is you've got a choice between twice as many proj and half as much attack speed, or twice as much attack speed, half as much proj. Once you've got enough clear and damage and stuff, it seems like you should be doing the one-hand thing pretty much always, because it feels a lot better to be able to maneuver your character around quite a bit better for positioning, for the ricochets or the shotgunning and all that. So entirely up to you guys how you want to play it. You can just load up really big hits and swings. That's fine too. But I'm currently at this much attack speed, 0.28, 3.61. And that's not on a very good base of a character for this, because as you can see, we travel all over the place and we have to get all kinds of stuff. I think if you're like a Gemling stat stacker or a Deadeye, you should be hitting 4 or 5 attacks per second, and that means that you're going to be pretty similar to what the Accelerate Shrine gameplay looked like. So yeah, plenty of ways you can go around building this thing, but basically I went with this mace, a bunch of flat lightning damage. The amount of damage you gain is based off of the enemy unique monsters always have 20 power and give you like 20 lightning damage. And when you're hitting them a lot and shotgunning a lot, it pretty much caps out your damage very quickly. And then you're just doing an extra like 500 lightning, which is pretty crazy. And then once you have the node that gives you lucky lightning, means that it rolls twice. You're dealing quite a decent amount of high-end lightning damage, pretty much always. If you're a crit build though, I imagine it just does more damage in the end, because I feel like I ran out of passives to take for damage and they just weren't very efficient. Whereas if I was speccing heavier into crit and was using like a war pick, it would have been pretty nutty. So what else do we need to talk about? My ascendancy choices here. I went with Stormweaver because I haven't played a Stormweaver, and I thought double shocking would be pretty cool for this concept. At the same time, I went ahead and got the chill stuff, so then I spec'd pretty heavily into magnitude of ailments and magnitude of shock, so that we're chilling things quite profusely. We have really good shocks, and then our exposure to enemies is an additional 20% for that lightning proc. So I am using exposure in the form of ball lightning to just throw out a ball lightning, and then lightning warp attached to exposure, so that when the shocked ground is created, everything there is causing an exposure for 8 seconds. I don't really know of a better way to do it, so that's basically what I'm doing to make use of my exposure node over here. So as far as passive tree, otherwise it's just trying to get a lot of magnitude of shock, a lot of attack speed. So I do have the skill speed nodes there. I do have this dexterity attack speed, which isn't huge because I don't have that much dexterity, but it's still pretty efficient for the amount of dex I have. Evasion across the board, we are getting skill speed over there, and also a bit of attack speed there, and then some other stuff, magnitude and whatever there. All my jewel sockets are trying to do about 6 or 7% chance to chain an additional time from terrain, and with all of that, and the ricochet on our gem, we do have currently 92% chance. So if you can't get access to this many jewels, because I think I've got like 4 of them, 4 or 5 that have 6 or 7%, you can also spec it more. So we can spec up here, grab that, and then these points up here. It's not particularly inefficient, so it's pretty decent. You can even go all the way up and spec or anoint that one too. There's quite a lot of ways you can build this tree. I think you can go further into this, you can go further up here, you can do this, you can go further over there, you can go crit base. But yeah, this is what my current iteration looks like, and it's made for a successful enough build, so you should be kind of safe in copying it. So aside from that, I just grabbed some breach rings that have a bit of flat lightning, just so that we're not only reliant on the power. So flat lightning and a bit of stats, flat lightning, some res, flat lightning on gloves with some attack speed. The rest of the gear seems pretty vanilla because I don't even know what the hell else I'm supposed to do, so I just took like res and some stats and stuff. The chest just has evasion, it's not even that good. Life res, movement speed. Realistically, as always, the best way forward is pretty much evasion ES, and then having a big ES pool with some decent life, with a lot of evasion, and then using Grim Feast and Ghost Dance and Wind Dancer. But I wanted to simplify things and just be purely evasion based on this character. So that's what we've done, and it's yielded this much evasion. It's a decent base for avoiding plenty of attacks while dealing pretty good damage and being somewhat mobile. So what other things to mention? We have our gem links at the moment: Molten Blast into Martial Tempo, Primal Armament, Scattershot, and then Ricochet. That was my 4 link, I think, most of the time, and then eventually got Ricochet in as well. My Herald of Thunder does some okay damage. Ellie Focus, Conk Effect, Long Shot, and Innovate. The Ball Lightning just has Arcane Tempo. Herald of Ash, I don't know if it's doing too much in the build. I've tried disabling it and it feels a little worse, so maybe. We have Magnified Effect and Swift Affliction. Lightning Warp is just for exposure, so it has exposure, 30% effective exposure, and 100% more chance to shock. Wind Dancer is nothing. Voltaic Mark, I don't know, I sometimes use, but doesn't really do too much for damage and stuff. I wanted to try a cast on shock setup with it, but I haven't got around to that, and I'm not really convinced it's going to be that good. But it does give you that 45 effect of shock, which, as I said, only applies to the first shock for some reason. So one of my shocks is like 90%, the other one's like 60%. And then Overwhelming Presence for like reduced ailment threshold on enemies. and that has cannibalism just for some life on kill. I think there's lots of things we could do with spirit reserves if we want to, mess around with other things like cast on shock, like other defensives if you were like energy shield based. But this is just kind of the setup I've got, and it seems to be working pretty well enough. So I don't know, haven't really messed around with it too much otherwise. Yeah, characters hit, like, been doing tier 15 maps from like level 80 onwards and has really moved through XP pretty fast. I've been very happy with it. I leveled it just using leveling uniques, trying to get lightning damage or cold damage or fire damage pretty much everywhere. Some leveling maces. So it's pretty slow going to begin with because you're not going to have this much attack speed and you're not going to have that much flat damage. And especially as a Stormweaver, our first few points really do nothing. And then we finally get some points and then we start traveling again. So it might be a bit of a rough leveling experience if you don't have the right leveling gear. But it really starts to pick up once you get, especially once you get this mace. But it really starts to pick up once you start actually getting some good magnitude of shock and getting some good proper actual shock onto enemies, because by default you're not going to be shocking that much or that hard. You might want to spec into some more chance to shock to make sure that the shocks are proccing. Realistically though, you probably don't want to be a Stormweaver. I tried to be a hipster about this. Deadeyes are really good, Gemlings are really good, Invoke is going to be great. Yeah, there's lots of good choices here, without having to start in a jank spot and then force shock as heavy as I did. Maybe it's still a good effectiveness, I don't really know, but I'm just imagining it's going to be a bit better for other setups. And I get asked a lot about my MTX. This one's just one of the ones from PoE1, Immortal Body. Yeah. And then a weapon effect from a previous supporter pack, I think, Elite Ember Keep. And yeah, that's what it is. So yep, can highly recommend Molten Blast. Get into it, get around it. Probably the only good mace skill out there, and it feels really good. It can be probably spec'd into and substituted for a lot of your current monk builds, but you'll have to just, of course, adjust the build a little bit. So yep, love it. Hope you guys have been loving it too. Thank you very much for watching. See you guys next time.